Okay, we will call this meeting to order of the Community Development Committee. Thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll start down there with Ken with introductions.
Hi, Ken Enixon, member at large.
Sam McDonald, member at large.
I'm Michael Rethinger, City of Fargo staff.
And I'm John Strand.
Jim Johnson, Fargo Public Schools.
Linda Klebe, member at large.
John Gunkelman, Fargo Planning Commission.
Melissa Rademacher, Downtown Community Partnership.
And then let's run through our staff while we're at it, who's here.
Nicole Crutchfield, Planning Director.
Karen Flum, Assistant Planner.
Tia Braseth, Community Development.
Miranda Wolf.
Good, thanks everybody for being here. And Car, it's good to get more familiar with your name because you're new to us. All right, does anybody have any changes to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Jim, seconded by John. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Minutes, the agenda stands as presented. Same for minutes. Do we have any changes or corrections? If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the June 18th meeting.
I'll move to approve.
Moved by Sam, seconded by Jim. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. All right. Let's go to public comment. Does anybody in the audience have anything to address the Community Development Committee? Don't see anybody? All right. We'll go on to number 5, Community Development Block Grant Home Updates. Do we start with you, Tia?
Hello.
Hi, Tia.
So we have a amendments proposal in front of you. You should see it in your packet. So some of the updates and revisions will be affecting 2 activities, the Affordable Housing Development and Beyond Shelter Senior Housing Project. And so this is just kind of a technical thing that we have to do. Once we have addresses identified for particular projects, we have to bring it back as an amendment. So that's what you're seeing here this afternoon. We are currently in a 30-day public comment period that ends on August 25th. And the Planning Commission has seen this and gave us approval on August 6th. There was a public hearing held at the City Commission meeting on August 12th. There were no comments received. And then final approval is scheduled for August 26th City Commission meeting. So again, the 2 activities are Affordable Housing Development and Beyond Shelter Senior Housing Project. So we have 2 address locations identified. You'll see those there in your packet. And the budget revision is for $181,000 that was transferred from the Affordable Housing Development to Beyond Shelter's Affordable Housing Senior Project to help spend funds down faster and to cover their full request. So as we begin to identify project locations with our 2019 action plan, you'll see us coming back a few more times within the next 12 months to identify those addresses and make sure that the citizens are aware. So at this time, the action that we need is to submit this to HUD, so your approval to go ahead and go forward with that.
Does anybody have any? Jim?
I was just going to make a motion to approve the amendments as proposed in the memorandum.
Moved by Jim Johnson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, was that Ken?
Yep.
Second by Ken. Let's go to discussion. Any comments, questions, or discussion? Anybody at all? If not, I would entertain a roll call vote, please.
Klebe.
Aye.
McDonald.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Gunkelman.
Aye.
Redlinger.
Aye.
Enixon.
Aye.
Rademacher. Aye. Strand.
Yes. Okay. We'll go on to staff updates. Item number 6A with social service funds, and that'll be Nicole.
And we actually need to do item 5B.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's back up one. Senior housing development proposals.
Yeah, it's kind of like a staff update. So, this is one of the activities that you approved as part of our 2019 action plan is for the home funds to use specifically for senior and affordable housing. And we had set aside $697,000. Part of the intention of that is we had already been talking with some developers, knowing that they had projects in mind at the timing of the writing of the action plan. And so with that, though, the developers kindly reminded us in terms of as they work towards LIHTC credits and work towards that process at the state level, that they have a tight timeline this fall. And so that required us to, what we wanted to do is make sure we set out a net to let the public know that we have projects interested in funding interested to support affordable senior housing projects. And so we released a request for interest, both through a press release and a public notice, advertisement, and on our city website. We had those interest letters due by August 19th, so that was yesterday. With your review today and action, if you're ready to do so, we would propose beginning a 30-day public notice process pretty quickly here that would then seek an amendment. So as Tia just was in front of you mentioning that anytime we're spending kind of project with a specific address, we need to go forward with actually an amendment to the plan. And as we go into 2020 and future years, we'll have kind of shifted this calendar so we won't have to do that as often. But with that being said, we did receive 2 requests. One was from Craig Properties, and that was at the address of 3129 7th Avenue North. A little detail, you have hard copies of both of these at your table as lay down items, but a little bit more about Mr. Craig's request. It's 114 units. They'd like to begin construction in the fall of 2019. They're seeking assistance for acquisition, and their goal is 50% at AMI for rents 55 plus. And the other project is from Beyond Shelter, and they're seeking $515,000 funds. The address is 425 28th Avenue North. 39 units to begin construction June 2020, and with an expected completion 2021. They have a series of steps related to AMI, related to 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, and 80%. And just a little blurb of what went into our notice is that the applicant should be sending us a letter of interest. It should include a narrative of the project, number of estimated units, amount of subsidy needed, and designated activity for the funds received. So you'll notice one is for acquisition, the other is for construction, estimated tenant income, and the percentage of unit makeup and project development timeline. We do believe that we can fully support both of these and are seeking your recommendation for approval. What we do suggest is, since the total equals more than the 697,000, is reducing the Beyond Shelter threshold of amount of subsidy down to 347,000 for this 2019 home funds. This particular project is also seeking CDBG funds and other CHODO funds. I haven't had direct conversation with Beyond Shelter. They're hearing this for the first time, but we would like to go ahead and process this initial request. Our thought would be there's soon behind these dollars is 2020 home funds. And so those 2 projects and their timeline, they might just sequentially work out that as we look at 2020 funds as well. Again, that we could accommodate both projects, but in terms of for public notice, going ahead as signing that the 2019 dollars as these project budgeted amounts, we can go ahead and put that range in there in the notice, and then that allows us the freedom to work with the home regulations and the applicants as it relates to 2019 funding. So with that, we do have one developer in the audience, so I don't know if you want to seek any input from them, but in all fairness, I'm not sure if I communicated clearly enough to Jesse Craig for him to be present here or not. They just, so don't count that against them if they're not here. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions or explain how this program works in a little bit more detail.
Okay, anybody have any questions, comments for Nicole?
Have you had any neighborhood meetings about the Golden Ridge one?
Yes, so that's a great question. So they are in the entitlement process right now with zoning and platting, and they are, I think, assigned to the September Planning Commission, and but they've already had one meeting, and if not, maybe a second one. And Commissioner Gunkelman is nodding yes.
Yeah, the meeting was, what, about last week or 10 days ago? Or, I don't remember how long, 2 weeks ago? Okay. And there was only one couple, and then another couple came late, and the one couple was immediately adjacent to his property on 7th Avenue. And I think Mr. Craig, I think, satisfied his wishes. But it pretty much, it's a nice project out there. I mean, it's for low income or subsidized housing. It's a perfect location for it.
I'll say that public hearing, that's always the truth of the matter when the Planning Commission public hearing, which, to see how many members from the neighborhood do attend that, or our letters. I don't believe any, I think a few letters have been received, but nothing to what we might see in some other neighborhoods.
And there's no problem with infrastructure capability with adding this many housing units up there?
No.
Because it was going to originally be a school, wasn't it, or a church?
Possibly. I don't know if I remember that far back.
Anybody else? Nicole, what's the recommended motion?
I have it up on your screen.
Oh, there you go.
What I'm going to make.
All right, let's call for a motion then. Jim?
I move that we approve proceeding with the 2019 Action Plan Amendment to incorporate the two projects listed, $350,000 for 3129 7th Avenue North, which will be 114 units, and $347,826 for a property at 425 28th Avenue North, which would be for 39 units.
Do we have a motion? Is there a second?
So we'll make the second, Mr. Chair. And we just noted the address, we're just missing in the suggested motion. It should be 4225 28th Avenue North.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, 20th Avenue South. 20th Avenue South, correct.
4225, is that right?
Yes, 4225 28th Avenue South.
Okay.
Thank you.
And was that a second also? And we have a motion by Jim and a second by Michael Redlinger. Any other comments? Thomas?
If I may just ask one quick question. Nicole, you said Beyond Shelter is sort of hearing this for the first time. Is there any issue with them not getting their fully requested dollars to move forward on this project right now and then trying to string it forward to 2020? Just want to make sure that if that's what's going to be actually granted out, that's implementable in this time frame.
Dan, would you maybe want to come up to the microphone?
Chairman Strand and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Dan Madler, CEO of Beyond Shelter, and I have with me Christopher Miller, the developer. And to answer Commissioner Hill's question, the dollar amount hearing for the first time is we can work with that. Moving forward, this will allow us to make applications, and with our sources and uses, we can adjust and accommodate in a future application for the 2020 and allow us to move forward with our applications that are due at the end of September. So bottom line, it's workable, and we have no concerns at this time for this particular dollar amount.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right, we'll call for a roll call vote, please.
Gunkelman,
Aye?
Hill,
Aye.
Rademacher, Aye. Clevey,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Redlinger,
Aye.
Mahoney,
Aye.
Enixon,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Strand.
Yes. All right, that passes. And on that note, before we go to the next topic, welcome to Thomas Hill and Mayor Mahoney for joining us today. Okay, Nicole, you're the next up again with 6A.
Yeah, so 6A, I wanted to give you a little calendar update for fall. I can't believe it's fall already. Yeah, so A couple of things for staff updates is, as you might remember, we are due for our 5-year consolidated plan that is due at the end of the year here. And so since we're working on the workout plan from the last 2 years, we're kind of scrambling a little bit. Scramble is the wrong word, but we're kind of strategizing on how to get everything done. I should say that's a better way of saying it. And so we've submitted out a RFQ, request for qualifications, for, there's people around the country that do consulting for consolidated plans. And so we have an RFQ out. This says RFP, but it's really a request for qualifications that is due on, I believe, Friday. And so any day now is due, and then we'll have a review period. And we're hoping that it is a pretty tight turnaround, so we're not quite sure what the interest might be in the consulting business to work with the city of Fargo. But in worst case scenario, plan B would be, we kind of have a game plan on how we would maybe break apart some of these tasks for smaller consulting assistance that might be more locally based, that can help us with some survey and assessment and data. So a little bit about the consolidated plan. I know many of you have been part of the CD committee and part of the CDBG development of our 5-year consolidated plan, but it's really a wonderful opportunity to set a path forward for the next 5 years. And what it does is it really helps us do significant outreach, needs assessment, and working with our community partners that we rely on implementing our these funds, these federal funds. And as you can imagine, these federal funds really connect deeply with our social service industry, our housing industry, poverty reduction, all of the goals that we do in community development. So we're really looking forward to an extensive survey outreach, some one-on-one focus groups, as well as some investigation on how we can, as we grow into a bigger community, metro-wide, across the river, we have all of these unique factors that make Fargo unique when it comes to social services and community development. So we plan to engage in a level of activity. You all would be part of that, so look forward to more communications as part of those deeper dives through the months of September through November. We do have a pretty tight turnaround in terms of activities and drafting of a final plan for the end of December. And the one part that maybe just a nuance of the consolidated plan is it combines in the 2020 action plan. So that also is like the first year of 5. And so you have your consolidated plan and your action plan. So at the draft of, we'd have a draft plan for you to consider in December on how we should align those goals for the next 5 years and how we should allocate 2020 funds as well. And so as part of this, we also have a assessment of fair housing requirement and looking at those barriers to housing. And so typically those are some pretty fine-tuned specialists that look at those details. Again, we have a plan of action if we need to go to plan B and we don't get the consultant help by breaking out some of those tasks, and then it becomes a little bit more staff-driven, if you will, as opposed to typically when hiring a consultant, you look for their ideas on how to accomplish some of their tasks. We might have to kind of flip that based on what we receive. So we should know a lot more in 2 weeks what we receive in terms of consultants. But what this might lead to is how does this tie to the social service funds? And so staff has been talking about that, and we're just now working on some ideas on how to kind of reformulate that. I know we have the Linda Klebe sat as the chair of the Social Service Funds Committee last fall already, and we had talked about meeting a few times throughout 2019 on how to restructure that. So we haven't had a chance to do that. Quite honestly, we've just been kind of, buried with staff changes and new community development block grant activities. But we do think we have some good ideas that we'd like to start brainstorming with you today, as well as with the mayor and Commissioner Strand individually. So the mayor and Commissioner Strand are also hearing this for the first time. And so just not to put anybody on the spot, but since we're doing such a deeper dive on that needs assessment, we really want to talk about stalling out the social service funds grant application. So a typical calendar year is about a month from now, we would put on the street a request for funds availability, and we would receive applications. It's about a 9-page application, and then there's we receive in the neighborhood of, $1 to $2 million worth of requests. We only have about $200,000 worth of funds. And so it really becomes a numerical game, as well as we start, doing a deeper dive of, we all know the money is important, but where is that money the best impact? And so what we're asking for, the reason we do that fall application period for 2 things. One is an alignment with the CDBG funding program, as well as an alignment with future Giving Hearts Day in February. So when we started looking at that restriction on that deadline, we're like, wait, why do we have to do this deadline? We know CDBG will work with us on the deadline. They're already working with us on our calendar, and we want to do a thorough needs assessment before we just blanket out an application and cause frustration on the nonprofit. So what we'd like to do is start to send notices out that talks about, if you're an organization that's used to getting money and grants and seeking interest from us in fall, is putting all of our usual recipients on notice that this year is going to be different, and we're restructuring based on their CDBG formula and grant cycle, and so that they can start doing their budgeting appropriately and not be surprised in February when they're seeking funds. That's what happened last year. So many people were surprised and shocked that the process changed. We received a lot of negative criticism, and staff took quite a beating, if you will, and you probably did too, individually. And I will say also the amount of time constraints that anybody in the grant industry knows that my office spends it's actually already started, between now and December. On every day there is an organization in our office looking for funds, and every day we're saying the program isn't designed for this, but they're using information they received maybe 10 years ago and working on that. So we would like to just kind of restructure all that, package that in a nice communication tool, put the notices out there accordingly, work with you on the right types of vocabulary, et cetera, and really do a proactive approach. And really that focus group, that interviews, the relationship building, and because we find, besides the funds, the most important asset that we have to give right now is the networking and the relationship building. And just last week I had, I'll just express this one narrative. I had a gentleman in my office who represents a kind of a church in the Jefferson neighborhood, but actually it's probably, I would call it a community center. They do music classes for kids. They do free lunch programs. They do all sorts of things. And my first comment was, are you working with the Boys and Girls Club? Are you working with Charism? Are you working with, but he's a new church in a new setting, and by all means, it's a place where children need to have a place to go. So there's ways we could work with him to align that with social service funds or even CDBG funds, but we have to get him the resources to do that and the capacity building to do that. And he wasn't asking for money. He was actually literally, it's like, I just would like a roadmap on where to go and how to find that network. And so that's the skill set that our office can contribute for right now. And further define that skill set deeper as we do that needs assessment. So that's a quick summary of, I guess, the staff's assessment and where we think we would like to go next. I open it up for discussion, or if you want to set up a separate time to have discussion later, we're all ears, and I'll close with that.
All right. Anybody, questions, comments? Linda, did it work okay last year?
We did a lot of work last year, and we looked at things very deeply. And I think one of the things that did come out was we wanted to make sure that every dollar that we spent was being the most impactful that it could be, that it was a larger percentage of the budget of the organization. So some very large organizations didn't get small amounts, but small organizations got a relatively large amount for their budget. And there's not a lot of money, so we have to be very careful with it. Are you willing to continue serving in that capacity? Sure.
Who else was on that committee, Nicole?
Samantha and
So I think Tom.
Jim.
Okay. Are we safe assuming the same folks will continue forward?
I think we can draft them.
Everybody okay with that? Mayor Mahoney?
I really want to thank everybody on the committee because it's the first time I can remember that actually people looked at what impact you made. And then we had one of the big organizations reach out and say, we still want our 10,000. We're kind of like, you're a huge organization, you don't need that. But you're exactly right, is the role really should be, where do you make the biggest impact and where does it help the most? And I know that took a little bit of deep dive and kind of looking into those organizations, but I want to congratulate you on that because I think that's the first time in a long time we've really looked at it in depth. And it's always easier to do the same old, but when you really go back to what's the purpose of this group and what's the purpose of the money, I want to thank you for that.
Sam?
And I think doing that process and what came of it has also taught us things that have informed this new process, which I really appreciate. We talked about looking at needs and then addressing the needs as opposed to looking at requests, but working in alignment that we can mush those two together.
Anybody else? Nicole, I want to say I heard from somebody that they were kind of directed away from competing for Giving Hearts Day funding. Are we having some issues with some of our grantees and the monies they're receiving and them qualifying? Do you know?
Not in the social service funds, maybe in the arts funds, but.
So that would be where it would be? Okay.
Yeah, but not that I'm aware of.
Not on this one. So do we need it, Mayor Mahoney?
Well, there was something in the health department that they had to
Oh, okay.
rechange some things, so I think that's
Oh,
part of what
okay.
John may have heard. Desi's having some,
Okay.
I think it was for some of our homeless areas, so.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is that, Gladys Ray has, some donation components as well as Unity, the police department's Unity Fund. So there's some kind of subsidiary nonprofit kind of organizations happening with, they're doing community work. And so sometimes that can all get combobulated together.
And for the committee members, you really did some great work last year. I think it put us all into a better place having had your study, your review, and your prioritization of the funding and the deployment to get the most bang for the buck. There will be people that aren't accustomed to that, but over the long term, I think that'll have a great value. So thank you for that. And we'll continue that committee forward. All right, item B, house moving and available lots.
Yeah, so this is just more of a curious, for curious sake and information for the Community Development Committee. One, we wanted to just kind of brief you on the TIF. I think we were here about 2 months ago talking about the tax increment financing and its relationship to maybe some neighborhood improvements with the Roosevelt neighborhood. There was some dialogue about that. And one of the things that kind of spun off of that discussion is there available lots in the city of Fargo where we can relocate houses that might be demoed, and instead of demoing, can be relocated to vacant lots. And so based on discussion with the administration office, the city put out a notice to see about if there's any available lots. The city would be interested in buying those. And we would potentially tap CDBG funds as part of that. So one, I wanted to use the time here just to kind of confirm that there's not a lot of vacant, empty lots in the city of Fargo. People think there is, but unless you're going to the Greenfield area, there is not. And so, and that we are working pretty diligently at the city to find out if there are vacant lots. We're, one, not wanting to compete with home builders or other, families who are wanting to, so we're trying to buy, kind of what's left over that nobody else wants. And then some of those get problematic because the rehab or restoration of those lots becomes quite expensive. And so primarily we're looking at taking out a loss of about $100,000 to $200,000 a lot by the time you do abatement and things like that. So maybe just a little background. We did do an advertisement to see if people in the, particularly in the Roosevelt neighborhood, but in the core neighborhood as a whole, if there's available lots. We received three. Only one was in the core neighborhood. None were in the Roosevelt neighborhood. And the one that we did receive that was in the core neighborhood was a developer interested in selling their lot back to the city. So in terms of, I think there's for me, some curiosity of trying to find out if there's people who are trying to get out of their property, like they maybe bought the property in a situation where they thought they were going to build a house, or if you're maybe a property owner, because I think the next phase is working with our inspections office and our code enforcement office, trying to do a reach out to see if there's people who are either upside down on their properties or wanting to do major restoration, because as we start looking at the aging of that housing and what it costs to keep it up, the costs are quite high, and so if you do the simple math, we've done this with Gate City Bank, you're not making a profit. And so that's where the federal funds come in to provide that support, or the community land trust to come out and to provide that support, or some of the other mission-oriented development. So I think that's next on the list of as a deeper dive. But for this purpose, I just want to let you know we only received one in the core neighborhood, one in Greenfield, and which again wasn't really the intent. And so we don't really see a property that we could acquire for the purpose of moving houses. We might have one in the near future related to the water tower project that the city actually already owns. So we've been looking at that a little bit. But then as we look at the cost of moving the house and the cost of connecting to infrastructure and the cost of abating any environmental, quickly doing the calculations both from our office, we calculated it out, the developers calculated it out, as well as inspections to see if our numbers all align, and we're about a couple $1,000s. And we are still looking at a loss of about 150 for if we're going to put that house back on the market to see getting market rate return. And so I'm kind of rambling here, but I think the main question at hand would be is if, what we're trying to figure out at the city is where is that avenue to make that decision on if we do want to take a loss on something like that. And so this is kind of more of a discussion also, or just kind of curious. And as we get these types of requests in the future, is that something to deliberate? We would be able to show you the math in more detail and kind of like the math problem. But one, wanted to let you know we put the ad out, and two, the results didn't really fare well. But three, doesn't mean it's the end of the story about relocating houses. It's just a matter of, as we dig in deeper, the rehab. So that's definitely a work activity for 2020, as we, our rehab program needs overhaul anyway, and we went to really look at that housing stock, and that we do see that in collaboration with the core neighborhood planning efforts as well. So that kind of wraps up that point.
In addition to that conversation, the city commission approved, kind of as a pilot, an application of pilot payment in lieu of taxes. No, it was TIF funds.
TIF, yeah.
For the Roosevelt neighborhood for that Roars Newman Center project. So we're trying for the first time where we extended the nature of the TIF to add more to it, so we have some funds to work with housing issues in that neighborhood. We'll see how that flies. It's not a lot of money, but it might be able to open up an opportunity or two or three or four for us going forward. And it's just a gamble to see if we can get some traction for that neighborhood. Mayor Mahoney.
At one point, there was 2 homes that theoretically are moving off. Is that still happening? The church had owned 2 homes, and I thought 2 homes were going to be moved.
Last I heard, the costs became too prohibitive, but my information.
We're going to have Zippo homes then out of that project. Is that correct?
Well, my information might be outdated from your information.
Ken, do you know?
I think that's what I understand too, is they were considering, but I think as they were looking at cost of moving, I think that.
So it's easier to buy a lot and build on the lot.
Yep.
Maintain the prices
Yeah,
at a good rate.
I think, and Jim Lashkowitz actually looked at it too, and you had said 150 to 200,000. I think you were talking about other costs, but it's similar kind of cost range.
Because Jim had a lot, he didn't,
Yeah, I mean, he was looking at it, but again, it's,
it was upside down, so it didn't make it
Yeah.
work, okay.
And yet, this is another new conversation for us when we have a neighborhood project going on where we start thinking, can we save any of these properties? Can we save any of these homes? So I'm maybe going forward into future projects, we have an anticipation of that conversation, and maybe we can maybe get a little more earlier result.
Just for the committee to know, the city of Fargo does have a water tower we have to take down. It might allow for 2 lots, so theoretically then we would have lots. And the TIF might be available about $250,000, I think. So that would help us, right, John? And then if we do the land trust, that could help allow us to do our first project, right? Yeah, okay.
So the renewal plan will be going in front of the city commission. So the TIF requires a renewal plan to say what we're going to do with that money and components. So that will be going in front of the city commission on Monday night. And yeah, I think that's all I could say on that.
One more step before it's finalized.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this conversation? Nicole, are you the next topic as well?
Yeah, so I'm the last topic here. So basically, the Land Development Code diagnostic, we did select a consultant, and Lisa Weiss, a firm out of California. We're pretty excited about that. The proposals are online if you'd like to see those, and if you're having trouble finding those online, let us know. We can send you the link. They're buried about 4 pages in. She's teaming up locally with SRF out of Bismarck's office, and but we're pretty excited. It's a boutique firm. That's all they do is code work and talking with cities who are in transition, which is we are one of them. And so we had 9 applicants and firms from all over the country, and came down to 2 finalists that were both very well qualified, and this one just kind of eked out. The core neighborhood plan update is due this Friday, so the proposals will be coming in Friday. We're really anxious to see how many we get and from where we get them, because we've heard a lot of questions, a lot of curious information from around the country and locally, and it just to kind of dispel any kind of thoughts there between local firms and national firms. Typically in this type of advanced planning, most of our local firms will team up with a national firm. And so that's typically what we see, not to say that's the only way of doing it, but usually they need that workout horse robustness as well. So it's not unusual to see a combination of national and local firm team-ups. But we will, looking in the month of September to do that finalization. The selection committee right now appears to be Commissioner Strand, Commissioner Grinberg, myself, Jan Alford Stewart, and John Gunkelman. And so we've got someone who's been part of neighborhood planning for a long time with Jan Alford Stewart and the Planning Commission, and then John is a Planning Commission representative, and Commissioner Strand with the CD representing that, and Commissioner Grinberg representing that. But those will also be open to the public, and we'll try to do Land Development Code timeline went pretty quickly, but the interviews as we get to that final stage will be open to the public, and as we get to the finalist stage, we'll post those proposals online with the consultant's permission, of course. But we've never had a consultant say no. Any questions there? That will probably kick off in December, that work, whereas the Land Development Code will probably kick off in October.
Some really big steps. Anybody at all? Anybody, any questions? Okay. Thanks, Nicole. Item 7A, the Community Land Trust, I'll give a brief update here. Maybe you've seen it in the news that the Fargo-Moorhead Area Foundation this last week, their board of directors approved the creation of a Cass Clay Community Land Trust. And this is really a significant step in our community for one piece of the puzzle for addressing affordability in the housing market. The city of Fargo has committed some seed money toward that project. They're hoping that all of the communities affected across both counties ultimately will maybe be able to help with some lands or some properties or some lots that might come available. just as a reminder, some of you are new, this came before our Community Development Committee 2 years ago, November. So it's almost 2 years ago that we passed this decision on, that we were in support of this. And since that time, the community activities have really stepped up and taken place. We're really on path here to have, I think, a start that would have been bigger than and better than had we just kept it internally in City Hall and in our own reach. But it's going to be both counties. They're hoping to this next year hire an executive director and start growing their staff. They're hoping in year number 1 to come up with 10 homes, year number 2, 15 homes, and subsequent to that, for the next 3 years, 25 homes per year. So they're shooting for 105 single-family homes in the first 5 years to launch the land trust. The intention is to keep that ball going and keep that movement and growth happening so that it can become more substantial through time. The interim board of directors right now, I'm on it. Cindy Gray is on it. Maury Lanning from Moorhead is on it. Marilyn Guy is on it, and Mike Don Haug is on it. He wasn't there the other day, but there's an interim board that will eventually transition to a broader community board that will have 1/3 of the people representative of the people who are in the homes and have stake in it, and then community leaders and others. So this is just really a big step forward for our community. There are well over 300 cities that have community land trusts. And for us to add this to our toolkit for what we're doing locally for affordable housing will be hopefully a really important integral step for us in that bigger picture. So good news for the community development. Nicole, your team just played a huge role in this. Michael Redlinger, you were helping construct this back when he's no longer with us. Tyrone Grandstrand had an immense involvement with this, and we've gotten to the point where we're moving forward and going to have something to offer that's just really exciting. Any questions or comments about land trust? Mayor Mahoney?
This is one thing, as a mayor, you're very proud of your commissioner. When I do word association with John Strand, it's called tenacity, because he kept at this. He was a little irritating at times, but he kept at it. And it's a good example. It took 2 years to do, but it actually is turning out right. I mean, what you've put out there, I think, is the right product. It's community involvement. It's everybody involved. It's not just the city of Fargo funding it. And I think that the goal and where you're headed with, John, is fantastic. And I was just thinking at the agenda of the meeting today, all the things that are going on with this group, our group, of what we're pushing, and affordable housing, what's going on out there in the community. And I was talking to John the other day and saying, don't you realize we are addressing these issues and these things are moving forward? And I'm sure, just like at the school board, when something happens, you get excited that it's happening in our community and it's addressing clear issues in our community. And sometimes people ask me about it, about the city of Fargo, and to me, it's the other people. It's not just the city or the commission or whatever. It's the other people that make things happen. And April came back, one of our engineers gave some great ideas of how to make this happen. And so it's just fun to watch if you let people mix, and it's almost like watching cooks in a kitchen, and you're not sure how the stew is going to turn out, but boy, it's delicious when it's done. So to me, that's almost exactly what happened on this, John, and congratulations. I'm real pleased about it, and I think we can continue to push this program.
Thank you, Mayor. And, just for those joining in on the conversation, I shouldn't assume we all know what does a community land trust do. Basically, it's a dual ownership where you have a trust, a community trust that holds the land. And the properties that are on those lands are what people transition in and out of as far as their homes. So if they move into a home, they qualify for affordability. And if they sell it later, the property sells, but the land stays in the trust. And then there's a shared benefit from the asset gain in the sale. So, and then the next people coming into the home will qualify for affordability. So it's an affordability into perpetuity into the future. It doesn't end in 5 or 10 or 15 years like some programs do, where you start out with affordability and then it goes to general market. These homes and this program will stay in the community affordable housing lane. So it's really, really exciting. So thanks to everybody who put work into that. And this committee will be challenged in the future to help partner with them, to help bolster their efforts, to keep that on the radar, that it's a need, that it's a vehicle for us to address affordability and so on. And so we'll be called upon for action, I'm certain, going forward. Okay, United Way.
Do you want me to come down, or can I advance slides, or how do you?
I can advance them if you tell me to.
Sure, yeah. I wasn't sure how long you wanted me to go along or go on about this, so I don't want to belabor a bunch of time here. So Nicole had asked if we had any opportunity just to bring up community-related topics, and so I just wanted to make the community aware as well as the CD Commission aware. United Way has put out a notice of funds availability related to a 3-year investment cycle that will actually target on reducing hunger and homelessness in our community. So the actual grant would start in 2021 and go 2021, 22, and 23. So we're thinking at least, 15, 16, 17 months out. The reason I thought it was timely to bring up, one, also the CD committee wrestles with the idea of how to properly implement the social service fund and how to maximize the opportunity there. We're thinking about that our own funding through a very similar, if not the same lens of how do we maximize the dollars that are entrusted to us to have the biggest impact when we think specifically about hunger and homelessness. And so, Nicole, I think you can maybe go to the next slide. What we're really talking, the next one. What we want to see, and this notice, we have a notice of funding availability. I didn't bring copies because it's about 21 pages, but you can actually go online right now on our website and read through it. We're looking at system-wide focuses to establish and maintain effective service deliveries, which are client-focused, data-driven, and evidence-based. The biggest thing that we're really excited about with this notice of funding availability is it's had input and clearance and acceptance from not only the FM Coalition to End Homelessness, but also the West Central Continuums of Care, which are a group of service providers that service all West Central Minnesota homeless providers. It's also had input and feedback from the Great Plains Food Bank and the Cass Clay Hunger Coalition. So United Way isn't just saying we want to give some money out and here's what we think we should do. We've actually solicited input from a lot of community entities and groups that are already working on these issues. And the reality is that we're now just putting dollars behind what we think works and what others are saying. We've wanted to do this for years, if only we had the dollars to do that. The thing that I think, so that's that slide. Nicole, I'm going to have you advance a couple, go another, this one right here. Oh, one back. This, when we think about who do we prioritize or who do we look at when we're trying to reduce homelessness specifically. So this is as of June 1. So for the good of the order and the community and this committee as well, I don't know if everybody is familiar that the FM Coalition is working right now on a housing prioritization list. And so everybody who has been deemed or come to, whether it's a homeless shelter, a housing provider, they get, it's called SPDATed, but it's the Service Decision Making or the Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. And it basically assesses everybody's vulnerability. So the likelihood in which you would actually die if you didn't have housing. And so based on individuals' vulnerability to perishing, they're actually assessed on how, what types of housing they need and where they're at. And I think when we look at the opportunities to make a real difference with United Way money, what we see the opportunity is that there's 244 youth, so that would be kids ages 16 to 24, or families with children, so 244 of them who are currently in need of housing and there isn't housing available for them because it's not the right type, it's not affordable, they don't have jobs, they are suffering from traumatic experiences. There's a whole host of factors for why they don't have housing. But the fact remains that there's 244 youth or families that are homeless today that we think we have the opportunity to house. Specifically, if we want to stop or put an end to chronic long-term homelessness and generational poverty. So when we think about making investment grant dollars available for 2021, 22, and 23, we want to prioritize ending homelessness for youth and families. Again, this aligns with not only the West Central Continuums of Care, but also the FM Coalition to End Homelessness has put out a statement that they too want to prioritize ending homelessness for youth and families. So we're actually accepting right now any organization local government entity, tribal affiliated entity, two, that is interested in applying for funding to let us know. We have a whole lengthy process that, again, I won't go through at this committee level. But what I really want to touch on is that we too think that collaborative system-wide approaches, just like the city, can actually move the needle. And I think, Mayor Mahoney, you just said it best. Great things are happening. But we really want to try and incentivize partnerships to move that needle even farther. And while we are not at United Way going to build any affordable housing units, that's not our business. We don't usually entertain capital grant requests and won't through this. What we think is really important and often missing are the supportive services. So it's not just to say you got into a unit or there's some units available, but those navigation services that can get you connected to mental health, job training programs, educational services, recovery services, things that help you stabilize in housing, and frankly, that whole sense of community. We think those services are often underfunded, and there's a real opportunity for us to provide supportive services funding for those services to become available. And so that's what we're really going to be looking at as we think about our notice of funding, and just again, the opportunity that we have to frankly end homelessness for those 244 youth and families. I know that's a moving list, but I think to us and not only both coalitions, it's doable. They know who these people are. And for those people that might be naysayers and say, well, that means you're not going to do other things. I honestly look at not only what Fargo has done, but also on the other side of the river, Minnesota has effectively ended veterans' homelessness, and I know Fargo is very close to calling that. Why? Because you put attention to it. You coalesced resources and you said, let's do this for this population. I want to be clear that all types of homelessness are important. We don't think that they're not. But homelessness is going to be an issue for these 244 youth for many years if we don't do something about it now. And so when, again, we think about, well, what are you doing, United Way? We think we're prioritizing our funding and our investments annually to really focus on these families and youth because we think it's achievable, it's doable, it's the right thing to do, and we're excited to see applicants come through for that. So if you yourself would be a potential applicant, you think you are an applicant, could be, please reach out to us. We have open office hours at United Way. We're scheduling time for anybody who's interested to come in, ask us questions, talk to us about your potential proposal. I would ask as other members of the commission, if you know potential applicants, please have them reach out directly to me because I'd love to sit down and talk to them because absolutely there's no one entity, no city that can just end homelessness. We got to work together. And we're really interested in seeing where this can go. So just again, wanted to make sure that it's available publicly, that the public does know about it, that you as other commissioners know about it, and that as any audience members who are in the audience or watching on cable access right now, because this is live, that they would also know that this is available as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or send out the notice to anybody who's interested, but I think that's where I'll probably leave it right now.
Okay. Anybody? Jim,
That was just like a preacher, don't you? Aren't you kind of fired up now?
Jim, I'm just curious, how does this interact with the school's analysis of homeless families and children?
Well, when you say, how does it interact? First of all, homeless children don't necessarily always stay in the district where they attend school. So we have a federal grant, as all school districts do, that we use to serve the needs of our homeless children.
Yep.
And we may have students that are in a shelter in Moorhead that are attending school in Fargo. There may be kids in a shelter in Fargo that are attending school in West Fargo or Moorhead. So, you know, I don't really know that it was represented in your numbers there, Thomas. It might have been. One of probably the biggest underreported homeless numbers are the number of youth that are couch surfers, literally bouncing from one friend's basement couch for a month to the next one to the next one. And I'm thinking that probably isn't in your data here.
It's not, and I that's a great point that there are undoubtedly hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are not counted. So when they talk about homeless, we're using the HUD definition of being actually homeless and that you've been identified, right? Because we can't help people if they're not identified. And I think that is the real key, is that so many of these students go under or not reported because they're couch surfing. They may not consider themselves homeless. I'm staying with a buddy. I'm fine, right? No, you're homeless. But they don't go for services for a myriad of different reasons. And so I think we obviously have to wrap services around those students as well. But we know for a fact there's 244 people. And so we want to know and start with the known before we start moving out into every potential subpopulation and things like that. But yes, it's true that homeless students are not automatically represented in those numbers that were up there.
It's interesting, I this last winter knew of 3 different individuals who, by our definitions, were technically homeless, but they wouldn't have acknowledged it or were so feisty and independent. Just the suggestion that there's help out there was almost insulting to them. You know, that they're fine, they're capable, they're gonna do it on their own, and I just wonder, if I know 3, how many are there? There must be hundreds or thousands. These were folks that just because of work circumstance ended up unemployed and couch surfing, like you're saying too. And then there's kids. Then this number, you know, what hits me is I'm from a little town that when you say 244 people, that's bigger than a lot of our towns. It's bigger than my hometown.
Well, I mean, I often say it's like the size of an elementary school, like a neighborhood elementary school. I mean, that's usually about 300 kids. So think about all those kids just going, being homeless, you know. That's not acceptable, right? So we don't think it is. And I know the city doesn't either. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities for us to work closer and, again, really prioritize where our funding goes to make sure that we can provide the supportive services for those people.
Any other feedback for Thomas? You know, the United Way, it goes without saying the significant work you do in our community and the partnerships we have. We're working with the United Way on homelessness. We're working with them on transportation to the industrial park. The United Way and their initial contribution and involvement with workforce housing issues. I mean, you're really playing major roles in our community on many fronts, Thomas, and all of the folks in your organization. So that goes without saying, but thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, anybody else for Thomas, anything? Nicole, is this back to you, the master plan?
Yeah, just a little bit, and then I'll call on Melissa if she has any comments or questions. But and then something new this year, month, as you saw, we kind of put out an outreach to see if anybody had any agenda items. So if you sent me something and I missed it, by all means, feel free to speak up. But Melissa had replied back on the downtown master plan, and as you know, we do a lot of work with the downtown community partnership, and but as a reminder, one of the things on our list of work activities is kind of a report card or a messaging back on the downtown master plan and status of things. You know, a lot of times people don't understand that it's a 20-year plan. You know, this is adopted as this vision, and our priorities change. And if we don't communicate about that as our priorities change, then nobody knows where we're at on the plan. And so the planning department's trying to do better at communicating about that. But the one thing I was going to point to is that there's an implementation chapter at the back of the Downtown in Focus plan, and there's a spectrum of all sorts of different parties. Another misnomer on the downtown master plan, or any master plan of effort that the community development or the city does, is that that it's a community's plan, not just the city of Fargo's plan. So you'll see a metric there on, and I'll send you a link to it so you have access to it, but a link to everybody's role in that. So whether it's, the arts programs or our social service groups and things like that. And so, so brings up the question is, what is the community development divisions and the CD committee's interest on the community, or on the downtown master plan? And just a quick placement to let you know that our first priority is the day shelter. And so that was highest priority on the downtown and focus plan, is in the kind of top few. And so just to let you know that we're in continual conversations with people in the kind of homeless field and housing field on looking for a site and a location and kind of the components to that, whether it's partnership with a VA, working with the Gladys Ray Shelter, first and foremost. That's obviously one of their priorities as well. And so one of the things that will be coming up in 2020 activities is, we call it the single room occupancy building, the SRO. And this is the building at the city. So if you're at the library, and if any of you used to dine at the Green Market Cafe when it was on 4th Street. And that is the building, the SRO building. So if you're at the library on 4th Street, the building just immediately to the south. And that is actually owned by the city of Fargo. We're in a relationship and partnership with the Housing Authority, as the Housing Authority used to receive funds to help us manage it for single room occupancy. That has some environmental concerns related to mold, and so there's no longer anybody living, as of June, there's nobody living in the SRO building. There's a caterer there, Urban Foods Catering there, that they have a lease with the Fargo Housing Authority, but otherwise that building is vacant. And so on 2020 activities, we'll want to look to what might be the appropriate repurpose of that building. And so this is just to let you know, as a staff and with the FM Homeless Coalition, with Gladys Ray, we all got a little giddy thinking about that could be maybe a possible location for a day shelter. This is just staff talking without any vetting or any environmental assessment. So we'll do some more outreach in relationship to what's the future of that building. Is it more housing? It has about, I don't even estimate how much remediation it needs right now. And so right now it's just kind of sitting there. And we are in discussions with the Housing Authority as part of that. So just wanted to give you a heads up that, one, our primary focus related to the downtown and focus plan is the day shelter, and then probably close in line with that is winter sheltering as well. That's always a priority, and as we look into the winter, we are in discussions with Gladys Ray, and one of our primary next activities on CDBG funds is actually working with the Gladys Ray shelter as well. So we actually have a meeting with Gladys Ray as we start to assign those dollars. Those dollars have been assigned to Gladys Ray. Now it's about what are we going to do and seeking an architect and those kinds of work. So we'll have some more updates for you. And then maybe, Melissa, I don't know if you had any specific questions, but I just wanted to throw that on there.
No, and thank you for responding. I think it's just the DCP, we get a lot of questions in regards to what are we doing with this master plan? Is it just sitting on a shelf? So, just updates and getting the public educated that there are actually things taking place and people are working on these action items that were noted in here, I think is really important.
Okay, anybody else, any questions or comments? Thanks for bringing that topic forward. Nicole, thanks for answering it. Anything else for the good of the order? Great attendance today, everybody. We'll see how September shakes up. We may have a month off, and then we're going to be kicking it into our fall cycle, but we really appreciate your participation. We stand adjourned.